little boy, about 10 years old, had been wanting a bicycle. He asked and asked and asked and asked for a bicycle, and all he wanted was a bicycle, and his parents said, "We'll see, Johnny. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see if you're good enough." He asked and asked and asked for a bicycle. "We'll see, Johnny. Don't nag or you're not getting one. Santa doesn't like a nag." "Mom, Dad, I really want a new bike. I need a new bike. I'm getting a new bike." "We'll see, Johnny. Stop nagging or you're not going to get a bike from Santa." So finally, Johnny comes home one night from church, and it's Christmas Eve, and he's desperate for a bike from Santa. So he runs over to the nativity set, and he grabs the Blessed Virgin Mary out of the nativity set. And he takes her to his bedroom, and he scribbles a note and sticks it under his pillow, and the note said, "Dear Jesus, if you ever want to see your mother alive again." Mary. What do we do with her? Many of us come from the Protestant tradition. And the United Church of Christ, our denomination, is historically a Protestant denomination, although there are more converts from Catholicism in the United Church of Christ than any other one denomination. They actually printed a book called Catholics in the United Church of Christ. There are so many. If you're a Roman Catholic, Mary has a particular role. The problem is we in the Protestant church never really understood what to do with Mary, and so I like to say we threw the mother out with the bathwater and we kept the baby. Right? We don't know what to do with her. First off, Mary has a particular role in Christian history. And today, being the third Sunday of Advent, Gaudete Sunday is often the Sunday we talk about Mary. And I have to admit, I have a devotion to the Blessed Mother. I think she's an amazing lady. And I want to tell you why I think so, and you're free to agree or not agree with me. I think we need to reclaim the Mother of Jesus in a very special way. There was a problem in the Middle Ages in the Christian church, because often what happened at this point, it's about this time the Feast of Christ the King we celebrated a few weeks ago, was designed. Christ was seen as almost monarchical. Christ's divine side, the kingly side of Jesus, became so high and so pronounced in the church. And at that point you see art, perhaps from that day, in museums with Jesus with a big crown and scepter and robes, and he looks like a king. The problem is the people couldn't relate to a king. The king was rich, they were poor. The king was lowly, or the king was high, they were lowly. A king was not someone people could generally relate to, and so Jesus became, for most people, if we emphasize Jesus' divine side over the human side, Jesus became, for most common Christian folks, someone for whom they really couldn't relate. And so Mary became almost, forgive the theological words, but almost the intercessor to the intercessor. Mary became the one that we could relate to, because Mary was the poor young girl from Nazareth. Mary was the lowly one. Mary was someone with whom we could all relate, because she understood what our life was like. And Jesus was way up here, because Jesus was God and Mary was human. So Mary became the one in Christian theology that people began to relate to get to Jesus, who then got us to God. Protestant reformers realized that no, there is one intercessor, Paul says, between God and man, and that is Jesus Christ. Mary is not an intercessor in that role. But you see how sort of time and circumstances developed something that has certainly been corrected over the generations. I don't know people who particularly do that today. I don't know any priest or pastor, Catholic or Protestant, who teaches that anymore. But 500, 600 years ago, absolutely. What do we do with Mary today in the church? A couple of titles of Mary, I think, help give us some idea as to why I think she's important for us to reclaim. First off, the first thing you have to realize about Mary, the study of Mary is actually referred to as Mariology, like you have biology, right? The study of bio, the study of life, right? You have Mariology, the study of Mary. Then you have something in theology called, well, theology, right? Study of theos, God, theology. Then we have something called Christology. Can you guess what Christology is? Mark? Study of Christ, right? Christology. Okay. First rule of Mariology I learned in the seminary. All statements of Mariology must, by definition, be statements of Christology. If you talk about Mary without talking about Jesus, then she becomes something on her own, and that's not what she was meant to do. When you look at the Gospels, she says all the time, do whatever he tells you, right? The wedding of Cana, do whatever he tells you. Mary points to Jesus. This is the picture of the Theotokos drawing, supposedly ascribed by St. Luke. Now, it was not drawn by St. Luke. People say it was, but we know it wasn't. That's just history. But if you look at the picture, what is Mary doing? Pointing to him. Do whatever he tells you, she seems to say, right? All statements about Mary must point us to Jesus. Now, I'm not saying you need to go out and have a devotion to Mary, but it does help us to understand the church, and it helps us also to understand our brothers and sisters who may have a bigger devotion than we do. It doesn't make them heretics, it just makes them a little different. And this helps us to understand why. Mary, if we look at the Blessed Virgin from a Christian perspective, we see a couple of things about history about her. Mary is in many ways the model of faith. Mary is referred to in the church as the very first Christian. You ever thought of that? Mary's the first Christian. What's the definition of a Christian? Somebody who asks Christ into their life. Who was the first person in the entire universe to ever say yes to a relationship with Jesus? It was Mary. Think about what that meant for her when the angel came to her and said, Mary, guess what? You're having a baby. She was young, 14 to 15 years old, unmarried, and scared to death. This means my boyfriend is going to not marry me. We're engaged, you know. I have a future. I've got a life ahead of me. All of this is going to go away if I say yes. But I can't say no because it's God. Everything she knew was out the window the minute she said yes to God. The minute she said yes to a life with Jesus Christ, every security, every ounce of pride, every ounce of her planning, every ounce of her future was right out that window. Because it was all a crapshoot from there on. Would her mother and father ever believe her? Her fiancé, Joseph, could have her stoned for adultery. Because he certainly would never believe it. Yeah, right, you're pregnant and you didn't cheat? Yeah, I'm having you stoned. She would be killed if he didn't believe her. And no one was going to believe this crazy story about an angel and the Lord. But she still said yes. I don't know about you, but sometimes saying yes to God's plans in my life means that sometimes my priorities have to get put on hold. It sometimes means that I have to know that God's in control and not me. And I have to trust that God's going to know what's best for me and going to lead me where I need to go. Saying yes to God means sometimes I might do crazy things like plant a church. Saying yes to God means saying my security is not important as my own faithfulness. I trust God to provide. My job is to say yes. I think by ignoring Mary's example, I lose a really important part of that message for me. Mary, the very first Christian, the first person ever to say yes to Jesus, the first person to ever say, God, this is going to be tough. People might not believe me. My entire future may be in jeopardy. But okay, be it done to me according to your will. I'm yours. That's pretty powerful faith. Another statement about Mary that people say all the time is that Mary is the mother of God. Well, a lot of Protestants will say, Mary can't be the mother of God. God is God. God doesn't have a mother. Well, they don't understand that statement, and I want us to at least understand what that statement means. In the early church, we had some people who said that Jesus was just a good guy. He wasn't really divine. He was a good guy who lived a good life, and he was God's prophet. And that somehow through his actions, he became divine. They were called adoptionists. God adopted him because he was so good. The other side of the coin said, some people said that God was so holy and so divine, he appeared human, but he was never really human. He looked like a guy, but he was never really human because, you know, humans are too sinful and Jesus was too holy. So what we saw looked human, but it wasn't really human. Jesus was either divine or human, but he couldn't be both. The reality is the early church got together at a council and they had to decide who was Jesus Christ. And they decided that Jesus had to be both human and divine. Because if Jesus was not divine, that means he was just a man, and his death affected nobody but himself. And if Jesus was just human, was just divine, that meant that he never really died. And it meant that nothing was affected by his death. So the reality is, the only way that God's plan for salvation could work is if Jesus was both human and divine. For that reason, they declared Jesus to be what the Nicene Creed calls God from God, light from light, true God from true God, one in being with the Father. Jesus Christ, both human and divine. Equally, co-equal, not separable. They then began to talk about Mary. And they began to describe Mary as not the mother of Jesus, Christotokos, Christ-bearer, but the mother of God, Theotokos, God-bearer. Why? Again, all statements of Mariology must be about Christ, right? When we call Mary Mother of God, I'm sorry, Mary is the Mother of God, not the Mother of Jesus. What that says is, there was never a moment, from the moment that angel visited the Blessed Virgin, that baby was not divine. That baby in her belly was the true God. Does that make sense? It's not that at some point that child was born and became God. That baby, that whining, crying, pooping little baby, was as much divine as he was human. The baby inside Mary's belly was the child of the living God, not just another good person. When Mary's referred to as the Mother of God, it's not about exalting her. It's a statement about the life that she carried inside of her. That's important for us to know. Mary is important too as a model of womanhood. Do you realize that at the end of his life, when everyone else walked away, it was the women who stood by the cross? Remember that story? When the disciples walked away, it was Mary. It was Mary of Magdala, his friend. It was Mary, the mother of James. It was Salome. It was the women who stood by the cross and kept watch. It was the women who came to the tomb that day to anoint his body. When the men left for fear, because they were too afraid the Romans were going to come for them next because they were technically his followers, women couldn't be his disciples. It wasn't technically allowed for women to be students. The guys were in danger. The women weren't. They stayed by the foot of the cross, and they kept watch until the end. I think that on this Gaudete Sunday, on the third Sunday of Advent, it's important that we lift up this amazing woman that we as Christians, I think in many ways, have forgotten. Last week we talked about St. Nicholas. We talked about a man of faith. And I talked about the need for Christian heroes. What have our daughters been missing? What have our wives and our sisters been missing? What have the women in our lives been missing in our society when we don't lift up a woman who says, I will give up everything to be who God wants me to be, and I will be strong and proud because of it? What do we tell our women, our wives, our children, our sisters? What are they missing when we don't lift up a strong woman of faith and courage? A woman who said, look at Christ. Let him lead you. She was courageous. She was strong. She was a lowly handmaid of the Lord who had no future ahead of her because of her decision. And all generations called her blessed. I want my daughters to know strong women. I want my daughters to be proud of who they are. I have 4 daughters, and I want every single one of them to stand up and never let anyone tell them how they can or should live their life, but to follow God's will, to be strong and have integrity and hope and honor and justice. I want every one of my daughters to be called blessed because of the blessings they are to the people around them. I don't know about you. I think our kids need heroes. Our kids need people to look up to. Whether it's St. Nicholas, whether it's St. John, whether it's St. Matthew or St. Mark or St. Luke. We lift up a lot of the men. Today is the day I think it's really important to talk about women of faith and women of God. Our daughters need them so much. Amen.